Well, we went to college.
Yes, I realized.
Where did you go to college?
We went to Spooksville University.
Yes, Spooksville in Des Moines, Idaho.
I would have thought that would have been located in Spooksville.
No. It's a small suburb of Des Moines.
Oh,
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Rock Hard Caucus, Iowa's only podcast. This is our 191st episode 191. We're continuing the countdown to 200. Evan, we're almost to 200.
That's impressive. That's a lot of podcasts.
What happens when we hit 200?
The show ends. It's over.
Yep, that's right. 200 is the maximum. No podcast can do more than 200. I've got a lot of stuff that I want to talk about on this week's episode, but before we get to that, there's something that's kind of a priority piece of news this week. Kanzi the bonobo passed away the other day. Are you familiar with Kanzi?
I am not. No, I do not.
I
do not know any bonobos by name.
Sure. Yeah, I don't blame you. There, I have a hard enough time remembering the names of human beings,
Right.
But Kanzi the bonobo was 44 years old, which I think is kind of old for an ape.
Seems like it, yeah.
I guess I don't really know, but he was really good at communicating with humans, like remarkably smart, as far as we know, for an ape trying to communicate with human beings. But the reason I bring it up, I'd seen clips of him before. I'd read stories about the remarkable intelligence of Kanzi the bonobo. I did not realize until he died that he was living in Des Moines, Iowa.
Interesting.
Yeah, he lived at the Ape Initiative. So he was a fellow Iowan. I think he had the right to vote. I think he was a registered
I was going to say,
voter.
can you elect a bonobo to Congress? Or, I mean, if they live to be, over 40, then they could be eligible to run for president too, I think.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I think he was planning on running against Zach Nunn, but now obviously
let's ask our guest. Can a
let's
chimpanzee run for president?
He's a bonobo, but we can ask him both.
A bonobo is a kind of chimp, isn't it?
I don't think so. Maybe
we
I'm
don't
wrong.
have an expert to talk about
distinct
biology.
Species. All right. Yeah, but you're right. We should bring the guest in. Making his first return appearance. He previously was on episode 138, just over a year ago. We've got history professor John Williams back on the show. Hello, John.
Hey, Justin, Evan, how's it going?
It's going well, not great, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, the loss of fellow Iowan, the bonobo.
Yeah, we're all in mourning, and that's the worst thing that's going on right now. So I guess we should start with that. Have primates, non-human primates, ever been given the right to vote here in the United States of America?
Not that I know of. Not 100% sure, but I'm pretty positive they've never been given the right to vote.
Yeah, I think that's probably. I mean, that's part of our grand history of denying the franchise to qualified citizens. But John, the reason that I felt you would be it's a good time to bring you back on the show is I've been reading just like a fire hose of news stories about the complete chaos going on with higher education and really education in general. And I felt like I can't grasp all of what's going on. But somebody like you who knows the world of higher education and knows American history much better than I thought you could maybe give us some context. How are you feeling about the future of your profession?
Well, it has not been good. I mean, this is also, not a completely new thing. The last few decades. I mean, anybody, especially in history or the humanities, entering a PhD program is basically told, don't do it. Or no, so the job market's been terrible. But what has especially happened this year, besides here in the state of Iowa, with, this increased movement and legislation moving forward, but at the federal level as well, is leaving a lot of uncertainties over what the future of higher ed is going to look like, or even teaching history, especially American history here.
Yeah, the state has been pushing for kind of more, I guess, more control over the curriculum of history classes, especially. Like, I don't know if that's hit you yet, but are you allowed to like talk about slavery at all?
Well, right now, yeah. I mean, it's, when you last had me on, we talked about a lot of this effort through the K through 12 level. And I don't remember what the bill was specifically that passed and, a lesser extent. It was added on very late, past the funnel, and wasn't as bad as when we first discussed, bad from a professional historian's perspective. Yeah. But it still went through, and now we're seeing similar legislation come up to higher education.
I think maybe a good place for us to start here is the president signed an executive order the other day to seriously decrease what the Department of Education does. They're calling it dismantling, but not like abolishing, because I guess Congress would have to officially get rid of the Department of Education entirely. Not that that's really going to stop them. It seems like they're just doing whatever they want. I'm sure John has a lot of historical context that can be applied to what the president can and can't do. But yeah, on Thursday, signed an executive order to dismantle the Federal Department of Education. And what's especially remarkable about this is our governor, Kim Reynolds, flew out there to attend the signing of this executive order. She's very excited about it. So excited that she wrote an opinion piece that was published by The Hill on the 19th, the day that the EO was signed. John, maybe you can provide some context here. The Department of Education, as a federal department, is not that old, right?
Yeah, no, that's correct. It was passed in...
That was an interesting time to freeze.
Yeah, it was.
The suspense.
I was going to say late 70s. I think it was Jimmy Carter.
I think that's right, but maybe John will tell us.
Oh, there we go. Sorry.
Yeah, you're back. Sorry.
Everything froze. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so passed in, 40, 50 years. So it's fairly new. But also a lot's changed since it was passed, which kind of explains part of what it was happening. So especially with, having accessibility for individuals with disabilities is a major thing, where the American for Disabilities Act wasn't passed until the 90s, even itself. And so, and that's just also just a changing way. Especially if we focus on disabilities, of changing perspectives, which really, it's not until the 70s where people with, things like autism or Down syndrome, the way that they were educated really changed, from being more kind of institutionalized in many ways.
Okay. So let me read some of what, Kim Reynolds is very excited that this, the Federal Department of Education's role is decreasing dramatically. By the way, you know who's in charge of the Department of Education right now?
Linda McMahon? Is that right? The WWE? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Linda McMahon, who is famous because she's married to maybe one of the worst guys ever. I think they're
obviously got
now,
the job too because of merit. Of course, that's a big thing that's going on right now, where we need merit for these people in positions.
Oh yeah. She knows a lot about education. She knows a lot about success in general. Like, if you've been successful in any sort of aspect, that can be applied to anything. Like, success builds success.
She actually is no longer married to Vince McMahon, so good for her. They're separated as of 2024.
Oh, good. Yeah. I'm sure she was, all those revelations were completely new to her. Okay, she's not, It's not her fault. But anyway, let me read Kim Reynolds' opinion piece a little bit. What happens when a successful businessman and a successful businesswoman are tasked with fixing an expensive organization that has failed for more than 40 years by the very standard it sets for itself? America is finding out right now, as President Trump and his new education secretary, Linda McMahon, get straight to work returning education to the states, school districts, and families. So that's kind of her framing of this whole thing, is that the Department of Education is sort of like, I guess, federal overreach, and by dismantling these federal regulations and returning the responsibility for education to the states, this will increase, efficiency. And states obviously know what's best for their citizens more than the federal government does. And it's ringing some bells in my head. But John, is this always good to return power to individual states?
Well, I don't know about the good or bad. We can talk about that a little bit more. But I mean, the one thing is the Department of Education, for the most part, I mean, one of the big things was managing student loans, making sure there's not discrimination, but also just distributing funds. Like states and local communities have quite a bit of autonomy when deciding how education's run.
So they're getting a bunch of money from the federal government, but they decide mostly what to do with it, because that seems to be a big complaint of hers in this piece, is that there's all this red tape associated with Department of Education money, and I don't know what regulations are even involved when you get money from the Department of Education.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big things, and I'm not an expert on the Department of Education, but from what I know is a lot of the fundings as well go to schools with needs. So these are schools in poorer communities and cities, more urban areas, but also the rural school districts that have difficulty getting that tax funding. So it's, especially here in Iowa, can hit both sides on that. And so, yeah, I mean, the department itself, there's still, this is part of how just the federal government works in general. We have a system called federalism, which basically allows a lot of decisions at the local level, at the state level, with the federal government as more, we could say oversight, but more as kind of a manager, perhaps, of how like these funds are distributed.
Mm-hmm. In other words, okay, I'm skipping a bit here. She goes over like when the Department of Education was founded, but she says the decades-old experiment in federal micromanagement of education conducted most recently at an annual cost to taxpayers of $268 billion, has failed. So $268 billion for the Department of Education, it's a big number. Like for me, I think that's a lot of money. But in terms of the entirety of the United States government, doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal.
No, especially if we're talking about, that's money for education. Like, right, there's administrative costs and other things involved with that. But at the same time, and I don't know the exact breakdown, but a number like that seems like a lot of that money is being distributed to these local and state education departments and school districts.
Right. And I think that a reasonable, rational person would feel that investing as much money as possible in education would result in a pretty good return on investment, right? Like the better resourced our schools are, the smarter people will be, the more access they'll have to knowledge and skills, and seems like a good idea.
Yeah, well, that's too. Just, people that are more educated, more opportunity. It's a more efficient way you could think about of efficient citizens that can, what some people would say, would make better decisions to be less reliant on other things. So, yeah, I don't know the exact return on investment, and that I'm sure there's studies out there.
Yeah, I don't really think that way about it in general. Like, I don't really care if it's like monetary wise, I don't really care. Like, I think that citizens should be well educated, and we should like collectively take care of that.
Yeah,
is probably a good way to run a society
for all citizens. Because the real end goal, I think, of this stuff is to funnel money out of public schools and into private schools, which is what we've seen with the school voucher stuff here. And then effectively, they're really just, it seems like Kim Reynolds and I'm sure a lot of other governors are like just ready to split up all of that money that was going to the Department of Education to have it go to states so that they can again funnel it into private rather than public schools.
Right. But there's still a question of what's going to happen to that money. And that's the thing that we've been seeing with all these different, dismantling of federal agencies and money not being distributed that's approved by Congress. So, what's going to happen? I think that's difficult to say. And Evan, yeah, I've heard people make that case. It's really to help push for the privatization of public or of K through 12 education.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, she says it's euphemized a bit here, but she says by returning these decisions about where the money goes to the states. In Iowa, for example, we're empowering parents, ensuring neither zip code nor income is an obstacle to enrolling in the school of one's choice. Obviously, it's, funneling people into private schools. And we've had these vouchers in Iowa for a couple years. It's a fairly new thing here, but all of the research on that shows that it is still primarily income based. Like, it's still only rich families sending their kids to private schools, and now they just get tax money to subsidize sending their kids to private schools. That's the result.
Right. Well, and even the school choice. I mean, the majority of counties in Iowa, large majority don't even have these private schools. So it's kind of who really has this choice? And as you pointed out, while there's these vouchers, tuitions have been being raised, and
because there's no regulation on how much the schools are charging. So it's just funneling public money into private interests. I was wondering if you even know what this means, John. Getting back to evidence-based instruction in basics like literacy and math. So something about the way that Iowa wants to teach literacy and math is at odds with federal instructions on those subjects. I don't know what she's talking about there.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is with that is this whole idea of the point of education is to be as a career path to prep you. And so this is getting into the question of what is the purpose of public education, or just of education, right? Is it a public good, as we were kind of talking about, whether you think about it in dollars returns or anything like that. But this is trying to break down what's going to make a good employee, right? Knowing how to read, knowing how to do math. You don't need to worry about history. Maybe just, a few boxes, check those off. Know about the Declaration, the Constitution to an extent. But yeah, things like music and art, right? We don't need those. That doesn't have a return.
Right.
Seems like,
right.
And this is this is a larger thing that's also not just in Iowa, but also with charter school movements across the U.S. But also with kind of that's rhetoric that's being used, including we're here also to talk about the higher ed bills. There's certain language that some representatives who have been supporting these have been pushing through. These ideas of we need to get back to the basics.
Yeah. And the basics when it comes to teaching American history. Well, I don't have the text of these bills in front of me, but the idea basically is that Western civilization, it's not objective learning of history. It's prioritizing the values of Western civilization, as they put it. And again, I don't have the text in front of me. You probably know what's going on better than I do, but what is the priority of our state when it comes to teaching American history to students?
Oh, the priority of our state. I mean, personally, I see it as this kind of this public good. This gets back to educated citizens, people understanding their place within the United States, people understanding, what has happened in the past to address issues happening right now. But now, if you're asking what the purpose is with some of these bills getting through, I mean, we're seeing it's more of this myth making than actual history.
There we go. Yeah. Myth making. And the myth is America is good.
Exceptional. In fact.
It's the greatest ever. Yeah. The greatest, the freest, which I mean, there's some merit there, but certain things that the United States has accomplished, right? We can't downplay those types of things. But the other side there, this whole return to Western civilization is just something as well that gets into this myth, but at the same time doesn't prepare people for the real world. I mean, right? Globalization, this interconnect. I mean, this goes back centuries. But also to understand that even, yes, while there's certain cultural heritage that goes back, especially if we think of just law in the United States, right? The United States, when it was founded, basically copied British law. Basically, the Constitution was even just, already these kind of given rights in Britain and adopted those. But we have to go back, though, to these larger developments that happened to even understand, an easy example of the interest of Western Europe in the American and the Americas, we could say, right? And it's because the center of power was not in Europe. it was in the East. And so of like thinking of ways of trying to change that dynamic. I mean, there's, economic reasons that were a big part of that as well, because, really up until about, 1700s or so, I mean, it was China was kind of the center of the world, we're going to say. I mean, so if you ever learned the Silk Road, I mean, this is like also part of it was how can we get a maritime way around this? Because
Silk Road was like the drugs thing, right? Like very recently.
Oh no! This goes way back. Yeah,
you're talking about the old Silk Road.
The old Silk Road. Yeah.
Silk and noodles. I think that was the main exports.
Well, yeah, that's a good thing to think about now. This like demand that our history teachers uphold the myth of like Western civilization. Is this just a reaction against like the resurgence of Chinese power on the global stage? Like it seems to me like America, the United States, as like the hegemonic power of Earth is fading.
I mean, I think maybe that's giving too much credit. I mean, I think it's really more to kind of put this nationalist type of story into it. Because when you can place that's more of an us versus them. I'm sure, the rise of China plays a role, but still, I mean, the United States, this is where, if we do talk about exceptional militarily, economically is, exceptional. And it's been like that since basically World War II.
Right. But is it as exceptional as it was?
Well, that's where we can get, questions about all of that. I mean, yes, China's been on the rise and everything like that, but still, I mean, it's not like, just tomorrow. Just let alone the sheer, military power. I mean, even if we just, nuclear weapons, we kind of forget about those, but just the arsenal that the United States has. And I don't know, whatever you want to say, that's, be able to blow up the world a few times. I mean, that's some power, but.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind all the time. Don't forget that these are.
This what they talk about, like unipolar to multipolar world. Like, I mean, really, since World War II, it's been. I mean, United States has been, other than I guess the Soviet Union was like the superpower, and now we're kind of getting back into that world where there is going to be Eastern and Western influence.
Yeah, that's some there. But I mean, I'll even, point out, I mean, of course, right, learned about the Cold War, and it's like there's two superpowers, the Soviet Union and the United States, except in reality, I mean, there was a really big superpower and a minor superpower, which was the Soviet Union. And just amid, the ideological clash, it was hyped up more than it was. I mean, that's part of the reason how the Soviet Union, collapsed so quickly.
Yeah, so you're saying they didn't fail completely on their own merits or because of ideology or anything? It might have been a little bit more because of the military and economic might of the United States and their influencing.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, it's definitely a fair assessment.
I'm also curious, like, so we're still, the United States is still like the most powerful in terms of military strength, economic strength. It does seem like the current Trump administration's actions are actually undermining that as well. Like, it seems like the goal is, hold on to this power, lash out, but like the tariff, the economic stuff, I saw something about Denmark, like, is no longer going to be buying weapons from us. So our global influence is being undermined by our own actions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of that can get into just thinking of global trade and things like that, where, I mean, the past 50 years, that's where people saying it's like, we've lost manufacturing. We don't make anything anymore. We're just importing things, which is, true, tangible things. But to think about, I mean, companies like Apple, right? One of the largest in the world. Like, yes, they don't make the phones itself, but all the information, the designs and things like that are still from the United States. And we haven't really, thought of that differently to figure out a different way to kind of calculate what's happening. Because the United States is still exporting a lot, right? We're still exporting, culture and other things, but ideas, but especially brands. I mean, thinking about that as well. But, a Nike logo, that's still American. But, it's not when we calculate it. So I think rethinking that, because that also makes it seem like, hey, we don't make anything anymore. Well, we actually still, a lot of things are assembled here, but just the way that to make goods cheaper throughout the world, it's been, I mean, I don't know if you followed with like a car, people talking about sometimes it crosses the Canadian or the border several different times to make that piece. But it's also like we have things coming all the way, from Germany to then Southeast Asia to all over the world of how these things come together. And that was part, if you remember, with COVID, with that big kind of shutdown of everything. It was just kind of challenged. What can be, some people call these as like value chains, where products keep shifting different places and are assembled. So if that explains anything, it is complicated, but it's easy to just say like, we don't make anything anymore.
Right. And, when there's been a lot of negative effects on working people, like jobs going away, manufacturing jobs specifically, if you sell it as a simple story and you make the outside world the enemy, it's pretty easy to win over the hearts and minds of people whose lives got fucked over by global free trade.
Yeah, I mean, well, that gets back to NAFTA when Clinton passed that in 1993, which is also to note, that was something that the Bush administration, the first Bush, was trying to push through. It was one of these examples that this is kind of a conservative idea of this free trade. But at the same time, it's passed. And I don't know if you've heard, I mean, people point this, if we jump back to 2016, this was something brought up a lot where, especially here in the industrial Midwest, that working class people looked at that and it's like, hey, this sent my jobs overseas. In reality, that had been happening for, 3 decades close to before. It was a trend. It didn't really accelerate anything, but it's easy to point at things like that and to be like, this is what caused it.
Yeah.
It makes an easy narrative. And easy narratives, as I said, if I lost anybody explaining about trade there, like it's a complicated thing. But especially politically, having that easy, simple narrative is something that you can communicate to people.
Yeah. It should also be mentioned that outsourcing the labor globally is also just to exploit people who can be compensated far less than Americans. Back to the Department of Education being dismantled via an executive order. I'm sure there are a few examples of past presidents who have really experimented with the limits of executive power. But is there really any historical precedent for this week's executive order, which pretty much gets rid of the Department of Education? And I think he moved 2 of the major responsibilities, which is loan servicing. That's now the Small Business Administration's role, and disability stuff is going to somewhere else.
Health and Human Services, right?
Yes, I think that's correct. So has this been done before?
Not in recent history that I can speak of to this extent. Now, there was, when during the Reagan administration, especially his first term, there were, similar sentiments in this idea of going to kind of tear down bureaucracy and the federal government, return things to the states. I will say, though, one thing that happened, if you look at Reagan when he first came in, he had to kind of do a, total flip there, like a 180. Because there was a major recession after these tax cuts, people kind of forget. And then this led into 1984. And I don't have either of you ever seen the Morning in America ad?
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
Oh, yeah. It's one of the most famous. It's like, look how everything is. And, forget about that recession. You don't want to go back to Carter. And of course, that's when his vice president, Walter Mondale, was running for office as well. But so there was, this is Reagan is interesting because he had this rhetoric but had to turn, and especially even things like for the environment was a major thing as well. So of trying to basically, I mean, he put, similar to the first, now the second Trump administration, basically business insiders that were regulated by the EPA to run the EPA.
Right.
And then in return, and that was actually Ann Gorsuch was the first EPA administrator. So if that name sounds familiar, that was the mother of Neil Gorsuch.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
so long story
didn't know
short, embarrassing situation. She had to resign, but then they put in the first EPA administrator actually into position, and kind of this more respected individual. And Reagan even expanded environmental types of things. And so this is even the 1985 Farm Bill, which is known as the Environmental Bill. So which added this major conservation element basically to tie, funding from the USDA to farmers to put in things, conservation measures in vulnerable areas.
Yeah. I also feel like the first Trump administration also was like big on like campaign rhetoric about deregulation and everything, and then was kind of reserved compared to the way that he was talking. And now second administration is pretty much like no holds barred, just go crazy. Was there a similar thing with Reagan's 2 terms? Was he like more aggressive the second term?
No, the second term was very much, very more, like, it was more mild in many different ways. And so this was even, we're talking about the Cold War. I mean, this is where he came in, and it was like, the evil empire. People thought he was this madman. Lots of great punk songs about this from the 80s, some hardcore stuff, if you know about, anti-nuke movements and things like that. So people thought this was a madman that's going to cause World War III. Maybe that sounds a little familiar. But at the same time, in the second term, then that's when it got to more of this open negotiations, and which credits Reagan for, defeating the Soviet Union, even though the Soviet Union collapsed after his term.
Did you see the Reagan movie that came out last year?
I did not know.
Oh, really?
I think you've talked about it though, haven't you?
We saw it. Yeah,
we saw it. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think as a historian, you might find it interesting. It's surprisingly, there's parts of it that are like not so whitewashed, like about how people thought he was crazy, and like the cultural reaction against him at the beginning. But yeah, it's mostly just like worshiping him as a god.
Yeah. Well, he is one of those presidents where there's a lot of myth making. As I said, he increased funding or spending, actually, the federal government by the end.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about here. I've got this article from Politico, which is about mostly about like DEI stuff that the federal government is sort of imposing itself on higher education. Specifically, this is about Columbia University, but I think the strategy is like withhold funding unless universities cave to our demands to eliminate DEI programs and stuff. The Politico article is called "Universities Are Caving to Trump with a Stunning Speed and Scope." Here, Columbia University on Thursday appeared poised to submit to a list of Trump administration demands that threaten core tenets of the school's mission in an attempt to release itself from a $400 million federal funding freeze. University of California's board moved on Wednesday to cut diversity statements from recruitment requirements. Dartmouth College on Monday announced it had hired the Republican National Committee's former chief counsel, an outspoken critic of birthright citizenship, as the college's top lawyer and leader of its immigration offices. And dozens of universities last month rushed to scrub diversity, equity, and inclusion policies from their websites and cancel related events. So, John, we've seen this a little bit locally as well. Do you think that there might be any... Well, what will the consequences be of eliminating all of this DEI language from all university websites, all recruitment efforts? Do you think it's a good idea for them to cave to these demands in order to get their funding back?
Well, I'm not an administrator, so I can't comment on if it is a good thing or not. One of the things I think with this is it depends on a case-by-case basis. of what the actual impact is going to be. Especially since Black Lives Matter movement, there was a big surge in DEI. A lot of the policies sometimes were just kind of feel good. Others were more of an attempt to make, address systemic problems and issues and to make, add equity actually into the name itself, right? And inclusion, and try to do that. So it's difficult of what will happen. If you remember even too, when, what was this, just almost 2 months ago now, when the Trump administration first began, there was a lot of corporations. This is why I can speak on, because I don't know if I've ever mentioned, I study Target, and retail is kind of my main focus, along with environmental politics. So,
and they've had a big sort of back and forth backlash to backlash with their DEI policies.
Yeah, well, many of these companies, I mean, they announced they were removing them, but you can still go, at least I shouldn't say, I checked a week or so ago. Target still has basically the same thing up. And part of this is because these companies know that it's good business practice to have these. I mean, one of just the PR aspect of it looks good, but also of just like having a more diverse workforce is profitable. And there's plenty of studies to show this kind of things. And so that's I want to say Mother Jones reported on that not too long ago. There is a kind of a question though, by doing that, it seems like they kind of are bending the knee to the Trump administration at the same time. And so we're seeing this at the university level, and right now it's difficult of what that's actually going to look like to say. Are they going to do something like Target where still kind of move things around and, take that target off their back? Or is it actually, going to be completely just abandoning them?
I do want to say, pun intended, you said target on their back, and we were talking about Target.
Yeah.
So you think that in some cases there may be a bit of strategy involved, like they're just sort of like on the surface complying, just take the target off their back. It's hard to say, I know, but
it's hard to say. And I mean, especially myself, like in the humanities, teaching history, I'm not dependent on these large federal grants and what that's going to do compared to, working in a medical type of setting or any type of STEM field where you're really dependent to do the studies for these types of professors to do their work, let alone to recruit students as well.
Right. Yeah. I do have a great example of the University of Iowa in this sort of ongoing discussion of like, is DEI allowed? This was in the Daily Iowan, written by Kate Perez, February 25th. Headline is UI President Barbara Wilson tells lawmakers, quote, diversity still matters. So this is in a conversation with Iowa Representative Brooke Bowden, who raised concerns about the university's compliance with recent legislation striking down DEI programs at institutions that receive federal funding. So she's the president of the university, Barbara Wilson, is talking about removing this type of language from all of their press releases and all of their website stuff. And she says here, she's quoted, "I can't imagine getting rid of the word diversity," Wilson said. "Now, if you tell me I need to, I will." But it doesn't actually reflect who we are. So it's just like a perfect encapsulation of that entire thing is like, I don't want to do this, but I will. They seem like they're pretty quick to comply. They're not putting up a lot of resistance to the removal of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's again, it's a difficult situation. I can't imagine what that is, especially running, a large R1 research school. I'm not, by any means defending it, but thinking of how to do that. And I mean, at least, it's difficult to take out the words. I mean, I can even think about myself trying to write course descriptions. And it's like, there's, we've even had discussions about, can we include like indigenous history in there? Is that a word that's included? Can you include gender? Can you include women?
Right.
I mean, this is from, I don't know if you caught this. I can speak now related to DEI, but the initiatives with the Trump administration to purge it basically from all federal websites. And did you see the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the atomic atomic bombs, was removed because of the name there?
It was a gay plane. Yep.
But I mean, it's getting back though. It's I can't comment on, what would do in that situation, what I would do.
Yeah. And I guess maybe I should have said this at the beginning of the episode, but nobody speaking on this podcast is a representative of any educational institution. These are our own opinions and thoughts.
That's right. Thank you.
Let's talk about one of these like alternatives or like a change that the state is attempting to make. You've heard of the School of Intellectual Freedom?
I have, yes.
Well, there's a professor at the University of Iowa who thinks that this is a good idea. I'm reading from the Iowa Capitol Dispatch here. Brooklyn Drazy wrote this last month. Let's see. House Study Bill 52. I think that this maybe didn't survive the funnel. I forgot to keep track of this one, but Iowa lawmakers...
Actually, it got added into another bill.
Gotcha.
So there still is a School of Intellectual Freedom, but it's not a standalone bill.
Okay, so it's not. It hasn't been signed into law, of course, but it is advancing to establish a School of Intellectual Freedom at the University of Iowa. I don't know why Iowa gets a School of Intellectual Freedom, and the other region schools seem to be like they're not. Their intellect is not free. They're not going to be,
Well, what they did is they Iowa State and UNI established their own basically civics education schools, which is kind of why they were left out, and the University of Iowa did not do that. So
okay, gotcha. So they've got their own version of it. By the way, I saw that the bill to force UNI to have a baseball team failed, so I'm sorry about that. Let's see. Luciano DeCastro, a research fellow and professor at the University of Iowa Tippie College of Business. He presented to the Iowa House Higher Education Committee about how the new school could help bring about more diversity of thought and how it needs to be protected from left-leaning members of the college community. That's something we haven't talked about so much. In these efforts to eliminate efforts to diversify schools and businesses in terms of like race and gender and sexuality and all that, there's instead an effort to increase the diversity of thought, especially in education in colleges and universities, which means we're getting a DEI for conservatives, basically.
Many people have said that.
Here's some stuff that he says it's. This is why it's necessary. DeCastro said left-leaning faculty hire like-minded colleagues who are competent in two things. One is producing interesting, and by interesting you can understand the pursuit of ideas, and this is called research, and convert believers with teaching that all align with the cause they cherish. Okay, so he's better at speaking than me, certainly. That made a lot of sense. As an immigrant, DeCastro said he and other conservatives who support this and other legislation are motivated by a love of their country, not by hate or political gains. Here, this is interesting. DeCastro said at the University of Iowa and Iowa State University, there is an 11-to-1 ratio of Democrat to Republican faculty, with an even larger divide for donations to a party. So I don't know. I don't know if this matters, but why are there more Democrats than Republicans when it comes to teachers? Why is that? Oh,
well, actually, DeCastro, I believe in that piece also does mention that this has been something, this is part of the political switch between the parties. But in recent years, I mean, what determines your party in the United States is based on education more than anything else. Mm-hmm. So increasingly, this is where, people that have higher education are Democrats, and those without post-secondary are Republicans. So there's some truth to that. But I will just say, though, even though there may be party affiliation, that doesn't mean that, we have homogenous groups. I mean,
right.
Itself. I mean, and there's still a lot of diversity within, or even, and still conservative leanings. Maybe not conservative that's talked about right now associated with the Republican Party, but as you were just mentioning with, administrators across the country changing their DEI policies. I mean, that's not you know, these super left-wing individuals, it doesn't sound like.
No,
The
yeah,
Democratic Party prides itself on being a big tent. So, I mean, there's room for those kinds of people in the Democratic Party, people who have more conservative values. So it's like, I don't know what this guy is getting at. I mean, I do know what this guy is getting at, but
Right.
in my experience, like the people who have like, you know, good careers in academia, like, you know, get tenure, get decent money for their living. Like they're not exactly radicals politically. Their needs are taken care of. They're probably fairly conservative, even if they vote for Democrats and stuff. Like they're not exactly calling for, you know, a revolution most of the time.
No, right. I mean, well, and think about it as well. I mean, the majority of faculty are old white guys.
Yeah.
Almost any institution. I mean.
also, like, what does he think people are researching? Like, they're doing like ideological research where it's like the purse strings for all of that is very well controlled. And usually, I mean, isn't the research typically being done at like a major public university, you know, on behalf of businesses? And, and, you know, it's not like it's all just utopian shit that they're researching or anything.
Yeah. And of course, part of his defense of or advocacy for this school of intellectual freedom, he said that the United States is a great country. It's the greatest country on earth, and we have to love it. That's intellectual diversity for you. Is you have to love this place, and that's what
he also said
an education should instill in you. Is you have to love America. It's the greatest.
He said they don't teach any classes about capitalism, and he's he's
in
a
the business school.
Which I think is the school that teaches capitalism. I think that's literally what the economics department of any university is.
I mean, that's just a straight falsehood.
Business and economics.
If you've taken any economics class, you probably studied capitalism, as that is the dominant economic system of the entire world. So this I feel like is I don't know, they got like cause and effect kind of backwards, and like just simply by establishing a school of intellectual freedom, I don't think that's going to turn the tide as to political party affiliation of the faculty. I've got another great example of like a sort of, I don't know, how do I phrase this? They're proposing these laws to sort of correct the end result of a problem that's been created further back in the chain. Like, you know, the reason that more faculty are Democrats than Republicans is, there's a lot of reasons, but, you know, higher education tends to, you have a broader mind, you're probably a bit more liberal in your thinking. Also, like, which party has been more supportive of teachers' unions? Actually, that was a part of the executive order. Trump said explicitly, he basically made it sound like Carter establishing the Department of Education was a quid pro quo thing because he received an endorsement from teachers' unions. I don't know if anyone else read that part of the statement. But yeah, there's an association between a political party's policies being more beneficial to people who make their living as educators. And so you're probably going to support the party that's more supportive of you. I'm sort of talking in circles here. But anyway, just establishing a school to encourage conservative thought is not going to turn that around entirely. Another example of that kind of thinking I have here is a bill that the Iowa House passed, which would require 80% of admissions to the University of Iowa's medical school to be from Iowa. The problem being that people go to med school here and immediately leave, right? So if you require the school to have a quota, an 80% quota of their admissions being Iowa residents, I guess they think that those people will then stay and practice medicine in Iowa. Here, I'll give you some data here. In the 2024 academic year, an estimated 70% of students at the UI College of Medicine and College of Dentistry are Iowa residents. And then Representative Ann Meyer said that this measure, which would require them to raise that percentage, would lead to more people staying in the state to practice after completing their education and residency. Now, I feel like there are other reasons why people are not so eager to practice medicine in the state of Iowa. Why might they flee?
Well, hold on. Actually, I have something. If just jump back a little bit, the School of Intellectual Freedom, because I can actually tie this into the med school situation here as well. So, the School of Intellectual Freedom, this is actually something that's been going on for several years at different state levels, led by groups. One of them's the Citizens Alliance that's been pushing for this. So there's, I think, 8 states, I want to say, already have these types of schools. Gotcha. Ohio was one of the most recent, where they had it at 5 of their state schools to set up these types of colleges. And they also, though, cost money. I don't know if you saw with this school, they're estimating, or at least asking for $4.5 million to establish the school, to have a director, which is, they're asking to be paid $400,000, which is quite a bit, to have at least two employees working in there. So staff members, which if I remember right, it was also about $80,000 each, which is very high pay. Yeah, that's... and then also for at least 5 tenure eligible faculty to work in this, which are all making well over 6 digits, which again is very high. So very expensive. Part of what's been pushed with these schools, though, as well, is states need to spend initially to invest to get them started. But their idea is that you're going to be able to bring on private donors that erase that cost, which could happen, but still, to run a school for $4.5 million, that's still a lot of money. But then that gets to the problem. That's taking money away from things to get to the med school, because one of the biggest problems with it is, as well, if they really want to add more Iowa students to it, is that they need more professors to be able to teach that in that setting. And at the same time, thinking do I believe that a state school like University of Iowa should be serving Iowa students as well? Of course. But with the decrease in funding that's been happening over the years, out of state and international students pay a lot more money. So by doing this, they're actually then going to even be lessening the amount of funds that are available within it, assuming still the same amount of teachers.
Right. In-state tuition is significantly cheaper. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, another thing to throw in here, federal funding for the international writing program also has been cut completely. So that's more international students, just being, nope, don't need them. Which, if that trend continues, the University of Iowa specifically relies on a ton of money from international students. So that will be a huge blow. So I guess this School of Intellectual Freedom thing, what is it? It's an effort to infiltrate this haven of Marxist thought by investing this money and just putting this cancer cell of anti-communist, this school, what, they're going to take over the whole institution? I don't know.
Well, I've been thinking about that. What is the point here? And like I said, it's not just Iowa. This is a national effort. Yeah. There are similar schools to this, especially at private colleges. So have you ever heard of the Hoover Institute?
Oh, yeah.
At Stanford? Right. But to me, it seems like trying to establish these, especially in public schools, as a way to legitimize these ideas, and especially the focus on American history and on this idea of civics. I think that gets back to this idea of not promoting history, but myth making. And this is even thinking, I went to Boston University for my PhD. We had conservative faculty. I don't know if they were Republican or Democrats, but it's still even within the history profession, there's lots of these conservative type thinking individuals, but that's still what they argue in the way that they interpret history. Well, they interpret history. They don't promote myth making, but it's very different from what's being pushed at places like the Hoover Institute, or if you ever read the 1776 project that the first Trump administration pushed through.
Yeah, right.
Complete garbage. But and there was no historians on it. That's the other thing as well. So it's we're going to have this big new way of thinking about American history, but we're not going to consult with any historians.
Well, and this isn't, I guess, the way that I'm kind of thinking about it now. It's it's not an expansion of the way that we teach history. It is severely limiting the scope, right? You will not be providing the full context of anything. It's just like the basics, right? Just enough for you to know that America is the best and will always be the best. That's the entire purpose.
Yeah, myth making.
Yeah,
not looking at the complexities, the nuance, and everything within history, to understand that there's different histories in the United States itself, like, right? A perspective from a Black American perspective is different. Indigenous American, women's, working class, the immigrant perspective, like these are all different stories. And if you focus on those perspectives, it tells a very different history in each one.
Bigger understanding of like how we got here. Yeah.
Right.
Right. And if you only get one of those stories, then you've got exactly what you need.
Right. Well, and then also one of those stories that's also like, yes, there were some bad things in the past, but we've always been, everything's always improving one way or another. And that's something I've been thinking about recently, where that's not the case. And we're seeing that right now where, we're actually, I remember we talked about this last time. We're basically the same age. And so growing up in the 90s, it just seemed like, wow, look at where we've come and everything. And it seems like this big setback, but I mean, that's happened in history before. I think, one just simple example is when the U.S. Constitution was passed in 1790, in New Jersey, women could vote. And Black Americans, as long as you owned property, you could vote. But shortly after, within a few years, that got pulled back to where it was only white male that's when they did white male universal suffrage. So they removed the property rights.
Yeah.
But then it excluded Black Americans and it excluded women.
Explicitly, yes. Right. So we're all it's not just a constant incline. There's a lot of ups and downs.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, and like cycles of backlash. I mean, things change and people react to those changes in ways that sometimes take us backwards.
I did want to just say that, the state is not just passing laws about, demanding that the University of Iowa Medical School has a quota of 80% Iowa students. There's a sort of like there's a precondition to that, like we're also passing laws strictly limiting abortion. Earlier in this legislative session, there was a bill proposing that they ban mRNA vaccines. When you're considering laws like that and somebody is finishing up med school, is this the place they want to stay to practice medicine? Like opening themselves up to so much legal consequences for practicing medicine, it doesn't really make this like an attractive environment to do that.
Yeah, so much of this stuff just seems like, like the really dogmatic, like ideological conservatism is just completely at odds with what's actually like good for business, what's good for higher education. Like it's just like serpent eating its own tail, like shit going on. It's really wild.
Yeah.
But Evan, there was a mandate last November. I mean, I think that's also part of this is that we're seeing not just at the state level, but, nationally as well as this, which again is somewhat of a myth of this being, there was a mandate, overwhelming, landslide election type of thing, which is not the case.
Like what, 20, 25, 30% of the population might have voted for Trump.
We had a little over 60% of eligible voters voting. And then Trump, just under 50% won those votes. But I will share this. I had something actually, this was last fall, a student in class said that, 99% of the country is conservative.
Whoa.
And it was like really stumped me, but I was thinking back of probably looking at an electoral map that just shows like all of the red. And it's like, but land doesn't equal people, but okay.
It's wild that people see that and actually that's their takeaway. It's kind of scary, but that's why we have teachers to contextualize red maps like that.
Right. Well, even with teachers, I mean, I know students like are talking about, let alone to practice medicine, to teach history.
Yeah,
and students don't want to stay in Iowa, so.
Because the state is like dictating what you are allowed to teach and like what you're not allowed to say, and like trying to impose consequences for doing your job in a like reasonable way. It's not good.
Stop indoctrination. So
right. Yeah. So maybe one last thing, because you John have a better grasp on the history of American presidents. The past couple months of this Trump administration, I mean, my perspective is it's been a throwing everything at the wall, seeing how much the executive can get away with in the current state of things. Who would you maybe compare that to in history, of American presidents?
I mean, there's been talks about Johnson. I do 20th century, so I'm not
sure.
Or sorry, not Johnson, not Johnson, Jackson.
Jackson.
I guess if you talk about the first. Okay. I mean, Jackson is an example. As I mentioned, Reagan to an extent, but I don't. At least in modern U.S. history, which I can speak, there is not anything that compares to it. And it's, as you said, it does seem like, just have chaos, see what sticks, what can get away with. But it's, in so many ways, it's unconstitutional. It is so much that's happening. If we can go back to the founding of the United States, is like what the founders didn't want to happen, which I also find interesting with this whole push for civics education. And it makes me wonder how many of these lawmakers actually have read the Constitution. I'm sure they saw the "We the People" part, maybe have a bumper sticker, but you get into it, most of the Constitution is rules.
Right. It's not. I don't retain a lot when I read it because it's boring and dry. I'm more into how I can take the general themes and twist them into what I want them to say and use that to influence people. That's what the founding documents are for me.
Well, I mean, there is, actually I had a student explain this. I thought was best, that basically the Constitution is like in D&D, like the core rules, Dungeons and Dragons, but then you can kind of, do whatever you want kind of with it to a little bit. My gosh, what's that called when you,
house rules or whatever?
House rules. Monopoly. Yeah. We'll just say that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Homebrew. There we go.
Homebrew. There you go.
You can homebrew your own kind of rules from it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that really, I feel like that is a theory of power within this constitutional system is, we have all these rules written down and stuff, but what are the mechanisms to actually enforce any of these rules and who enforces them? Like, if I can get away with it, I can do it. Like, that's the rule now.
What's easier, passing a constitutional amendment or just ignoring parts of the Constitution when it suits you?
Just doing what you want and daring people to stop you, which I feel is a pretty good comparison to Jackson.
Yeah. I mean, that's even thinking of that. I mean, Nixon, everyone thinks of Watergate, but what has happened? Like, Watergate doesn't seem like that much, but still, even then, too, of just like, this is too much and resigning and, still following the Constitution, understanding how even at that time, how, unprecedented it was and how, the backlash would have been.
Yeah. What is the difference? I mean, I guess that their
media environment.
There was some like accountability, and he, at some level, Nixon must have cared, like he cared what people said about him and the way that they were, taking legal action against him and his associates. Like, it actually mattered, whereas it doesn't seem to bother Donald Trump.
Well,
and there's limits to how much they've been able to actually, hold him accountable.
Yeah. Well, there's the media, but also there's been, last decade or two, there's been disenfranchising efforts. So it's like I think that's one thing that's important to remember is many of these things, even like DEI, abortion rights, all these things, they are popular, right? But it doesn't calculate into, electorally, into the votes, especially of who's running in places at the state houses, which is something as well where, back in the 70s, I don't know the exact number, but it was much more balanced, if anything, than even Democrat leaning in the state houses. So,
well, you teach history, but does any of your expertise give you an insight into like what the future looks like? Can you tell the future based on what you know of the past? What's going to happen with all this?
Yeah. Historians are very bad at predicting the future. I have you can see all the books behind me. So many of them, especially written 2008, 2009, of all this hope in a post-racial society, did not happen. So.
Okay.
Spoiler.
So the end of history. Francis Fukuyama.
Yeah.
Well, we have surpassed an hour. We should probably start wrapping up. John, is there anything that you would like our listeners to know about other than what we've already said?
One thing just so you know, if you've been following stuff happening in the House, it's unsure how much is going to be taken up in the Senate.
Mhm.
And so we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Other than that, I'm not on X anymore.
Oh,
I just deleted the app. I didn't delete my account, but I am fairly active on Instagram, millennial here. But so you can find me at Jonathan, John, Athn, K Williams. So my full name. And I do post actively on that and share articles and other things. So
great. Yeah, I'll link to that so people can find you easily on Instagram. All right. We've got a few things we need to plug. This Saturday, March 29th, there is a show at Trumpet Blossom in Iowa City, which is a fundraiser for the Iowa Trans Mutual Aid Fund. Some bands that will be playing include Early Girl and Miss Christine. Very good local bands. There's another fundraiser show next month that I want to make sure people know about. April 12th, a fundraiser show at Public Space 1 Close House. I mentioned this, I think, last week, but there's a Sudanese family who is trying to help some of their relatives, flee an ongoing war and conflict, currently stuck in Egypt, and they're trying to get them over here. I'm going to be playing at that along with Peak Dead, Betho, Young Rascal, and Hadiza. It'll be a really good show, April 12th. Evan, I was thinking we can probably just spill the beans a little bit about May 7th.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, first ever Rock Hard Caucus live event is happening on May 7th at Film Scene. We'll be showing some movies and stuff. There will be more details soon, but we've been telling people to hold it on their calendars. Now you know exactly why. You probably could have guessed. We're doing a live show at Film Scene May 7th. Come on out.
Yeah. All proceeds go to Trans Mutual Aid, Iowa Trans Mutual Aid Fund.
Yes, thank you for remembering that. And that is all audience proceeds.
Yes.
Every dollar people spend to get into the show will be going to Iowa Trans Mutual Aid Fund. All right. If you have a phone, you can call us at 319-849-8733. Leave us a message, and we may listen to that message and play it on the show if it's interesting enough. And those messages end up on Rock Hard Call Us, which is a related show, which you can listen to at patreon.com/rockhardcaucus. In fact, a new one just came out a few days ago. And if you're up there on the Patreon, there's also a new episode of Speed Freak Read Speak coming out in a few days. That's where we review Sonic the Hedgehog comic books. Much less serious than what we were talking about today. We also like to end every show with some local music, and today I will be closing the show with, I don't know the name of this tune, I could have asked him, but a recording I made of a live performance on March 15th of Toy Away, which is my friend Pat O'Connor. He played at Trumpet Blossom. He has like a pile of like analog instruments and tape recorders and stuff, and he just like turns it into a layered kind of, it's very fun. You'll like the music. I love it. And I'm going to play it now. All right. You can find his music at toyaway.bandcamp.com. Okay, I think that's everything. I think that's all we need to get out there. So, did we solve all these issues going on with the federal government and higher education? Maybe not today, we didn't, but we're starting. We're starting to solve the problems.
Raising awareness is the first step.
Yeah, in case you didn't know, things are pretty wild right now. We're in an uncertain time. But thank you, John, for helping us make sense of some of this. Your knowledge is valuable here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
All right, see you next week, everybody.